The shadows of 7 years clung to my skin like smoke, each day blending into the next in this suffocating room where hope had withered. The scent of incense could never quite mask the decay beneath, the slow erosion of everything I once was. My hands, once meant for creating beauty, had learned to craft only darkness. In this place where souls were bartered like currency, I had become something I barely recognized, a ghost wearing my own face, waiting for an end that seemed as distant as the stars.
Zizi Han.
A boy around 17 broke down the door and entered the brothel room I had lived in for 7 years. He looked military, tall, blond with short hair and a beret. He wore a white shirt, gray jacket, and boots. "Yes, it's me. But I won't return to the one who sent you." He helped me stand and guided me by placing his hand on my back.
"Tell me your story on the road. Aaron told me to bring you back."
And so I did. I have lived my life for beauty and art, but then this ruthless man bought me. Ever since then, I was nothing but a night stalker, a poison maker. I always saved the worst for him, though I never ran away from him. Yet I shall tell you the reason why I ended up with you in such tragedy, Reiner.
You should. Anyway, the time is gone.
I looked at his face, blunt, empty eyes watching me, the scar on his nose that went just above his eyes like a line. Yet he wasn't hurting me. The way he grabbed my hand and the pace at which he walked suited me. My heart wasn't racing, it beat steadily. It was the time before. I was Chinese, the last child of a family of 9. My family was poor enough to sell me to a temple to become a Yao-Lang, a priest of the Yao god, those you now know as the Viperium family. A Yao priest knows how to handle poisons and medication, has advanced knowledge in surgical practice and legal pathology, along with mastering conversation, cookery, and makeup. Few of the 900 boys who were sold with me at that time reached the age of 17. I was lucky, bought by an old wealthy man who brought me to Europe. The morning mist clung to the mountain temple like ghosts reluctant to depart, and I, barely 8 years old, stood among the sea of other children, 900 souls sold into servitude, though we didn't understand it then. We thought we were chosen, blessed to serve the Yao god. How naive we were. "Zizi," called Master Lu, his voice cutting through the dawn air like a blade. "Step forward." I had earned that name, Zizi, from the way the other boys pronounced my given name, Yushi. It stuck, becoming who I was in this place where our old identities were systematically stripped away. The first lesson was always the hardest. Master Lu held a vial of clear liquid, beautiful in its simplicity. "This is your first poison, children. 1 drop on the tongue of a sparrow will stop its heart in moments. You will learn to make this, to understand its nature, to respect its power." The boy next to me, couldn't have been more than 7, began to cry. Master Lu's face remained impassive. "Weakness has no place here. Those who cannot stomach the path of Yao will not see another season." And he was right. By winter that boy was gone, along with dozens of others. The days blended into a routine of calculated cruelty disguised as education. We learned the art of poison making not through gentle instruction, but through trial and error with our own bodies as test subjects. A failed mixture meant 3 days without food. A contaminated batch meant cleaning the temple floors with our bare hands until they bled. "Pain is the greatest teacher," Master Lu would say as he watched us struggle with formulas that seemed impossible to master. "Those who survive my lessons will be invincible." The advanced training was worse. By age 12, I could identify 37 different poisons by scent alone, not because I was gifted, but because failure meant tasting each one until I learned the difference. The sick, sweet smell of nightshade still haunts my dreams, as does the bitter metallic tang of mercury compounds that burned my tongue and left me dizzy for days. But it wasn't just poisons we learned. The path of Yao demanded perfection in all things. Conversation became an art of manipulation. We learned to read faces, to find weaknesses, to say exactly what people needed to hear. Cookery was taught through starvation. We learned to prepare exquisite meals we were forbidden to taste. Makeup became a mask for our suffering, transforming bruised and hollowed faces into porcelain perfection. The surgical training was perhaps the most brutal. Master Lu believed that to heal, we first had to understand pain intimately. We practiced on each other, small cuts at first, then deeper wounds. Learning to stitch skin while trying not to faint from blood loss. Understanding anatomy through the screams of our fellow students. Zizi, hold still. My training partner, aiming, whispered as he prepared to make an incision on my forearm. His hand shook, not from fear, but from malnutrition. We were fed just enough to keep us alive, never enough to thrive. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was watching friends disappear. Some died from the training itself, their young bodies unable to withstand the constant assault of poisons and procedures. Others simply vanished in the night, taken away when they couldn't meet the impossible standards set before us. Aiming lasted until he was 14. One day he was there, struggling alongside me with a particularly complex antidote formula, and the next morning his sleeping mat was empty. I never learned what happened to him, but I can guess. In the temple of Yao, there was no room for imperfection. By 15, only 37 of us remained from the original 900. We had become something inhuman, beautiful, deadly creatures who could heal or kill with equal skill. We moved like shadows, spoke in whispers, and trusted no one. Love was beaten out of us early, compassion was viewed as contamination. Master Lu looked at us survivors with something that might have been pride, though his face never betrayed emotion. "You are no longer children," he announced on the day we turned 16. "You are weapons, forged in pain and tempered by suffering. The world will fear and desire you in equal measure." He was right. When the old wealthy European man came to purchase one of us, he looked at our group with the hunger of a collector examining rare artifacts. His eyes settled on me, perhaps because I had learned to hide my pain so well behind a mask of serene beauty, or perhaps because I alone had mastered every single discipline without showing the madness that had claimed others. "That one," he said, pointing at me with a jeweled finger. "He has the look of a poet and the stillness of an assassin." As I was led away from the only home I had known for 8 years, I felt neither relief nor fear. The temple had taught me that emotions were weaknesses to be excised. I had learned to survive by becoming empty, beautiful, and dangerous, exactly what Master Lu intended. But deep inside, buried beneath layers of training and trauma, something small and defiant still whispered my real name. Yu-Shi. The part of me that remembered being loved, being wanted for something other than my ability to kill. That whisper would sustain me through all the darkness to come, though I didn't know it then. Looking back now, as Reiner guides me through these streets toward an uncertain future, I understand that the temple didn't just teach us to be weapons, it taught us to be survivors. And survival, I've learned, is both a gift and a curse. Chapter 2: Love and Lust. After 5 months, he died. Europe was enchanting. I was in Budapest, living in the old Habsburg city. I loved it, my studio inherited from my master, my job as a spa worker. But most of all, I loved January. He was one of my customers, a regular one. Though I knew my limitations and the fact that Anton Duval had put an eye on me, I continued to engage in conversation with Jan. Jan first walked into the spa on a Tuesday afternoon when the autumn light filtered through the tall windows like liquid gold. I was preparing herbal treatments, my hands working automatically through the familiar motions I'd perfected over months of serving Budapest's elite. The scent of lavender and chamomile filled the air, a welcome change from the harsher fragrances I'd grown accustomed to in my former life. He was different from my usual clients. Where others carried themselves with the pompous air of inherited wealth, Jan moved with quiet confidence. His clothes were well made but not ostentatious. A writer's clothes, I would later learn. Dark hair that caught the light, hands that spoke of someone who worked with words rather than wielding power over others. "I've heard your treatments are exceptional," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't immediately place. Hungarian, but with something else underneath, perhaps German or Austrian. "I do my best to serve," I replied, falling automatically into the subservient tone my training had ingrained in me. but Jan frowned at my response. Please, none of that. I'm just a man who's been working too hard and needs someone skilled to help with these impossible knots in my shoulders. That first session lasted 2 hours instead of the usual one. Not because the treatment took longer, but because Jan talked, really talked, and somehow drew me into conversation despite every instinct telling me to maintain professional distance. He spoke of books, of the changing political climate in Europe, of art and music and ideas that made my mind race in ways it hadn't since before the temple. You have thoughts about Pushkin's poetry, he observed as I worked on a particularly stubborn tension point. I can see it in your expression. I've read some of his work, I admitted cautiously. And? What did you think of Eugene Onegin? I paused, my hands stilling on his shoulders. No client had ever asked my opinion about anything beyond which oils I preferred for treatments. I think Onegin was a fool, I said quietly. He had love offered freely and rejected it out of pride and fear. Jan twisted to look at me, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Exactly. So many readers sympathize with him, but you see the truth of it. That was how it began. These conversations that grew longer and more intimate with each visit. Jan came twice a week, always requesting me specifically. We discussed literature, philosophy, the changing face of the city around us. He told me about his work as a translator and occasional journalist. I found myself sharing carefully edited versions of my own experiences, speaking of my love for art and beauty while omitting the darker chapters. After a month, he began bringing me books. Small volumes of poetry, novels by authors I'd heard of but never had the chance to read. I thought you might enjoy these, he'd say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I treasured those books like sacred objects. In my small studio apartment, I would read by candlelight long into the night, losing myself in worlds that existed far from temples and brothels and the watchful eyes of men like Anton Duval. It was during our 7th session that something shifted between us. I was working on his neck, my fingers finding familiar patterns of tension, when he caught my hand gently in his. Zizi, he said. He'd never used my full name, just this shortened version that somehow sounded like music when he spoke it. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I find myself thinking about our conversations long after I leave here. My heart began to race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I think about them too. Would you? He hesitated, vulnerability creeping into his voice. Would you consider having dinner with me? Somewhere away from here, just as two people who enjoy each other's company? Every lesson from the temple screamed warnings in my mind. Every survival instinct told me to refuse, to maintain the careful boundaries that kept me safe. But looking into Jan's eyes, I saw something I'd almost forgotten existed, genuine affection, offered without condition or transaction. I would like that, I whispered. Our first real date was at a small cafe tucked away in Buda's winding streets, far from the fashionable areas where I might be recognized. Jan had chosen it carefully, I realized, understanding without being told that discretion was important to me. We talked for hours over wine and simple food, our conversation flowing like water finding its natural course. Jan told me about growing up in Vienna, about his dreams of writing the great novel that would capture the spirit of this changing age. I shared more of my own story, the artistic training, the journey from east to west, though still carefully omitting the darker truths. You're remarkable, he said as we walked slowly back toward my district, both of us reluctant to end the evening. The way you see beauty in everything, the depth of your understanding, it's like you've lived several lifetimes already. If only he knew how close to the truth that was. When we reached the corner where we would have to part ways, Jan stopped and turned to face me. Zizi, I know your situation is complicated. I don't know all the details, and I won't press you for them. But I want you to know that whatever this becomes between us, I see you as more than... He struggled for words. More than a service provider, I finished softly. More than that. Much more. He kissed me then, gentle and questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, tasting freedom on his lips. For 3 months, we lived in a bubble of stolen happiness. Jan never pressed for more information about my circumstances, and I never volunteered the truth about Anton's surveillance or my past. We met in cafes and parks, attended concerts and art exhibitions. Jan introduced me to his small circle of intellectual friends as Zizi, a fascinating man with insights into Eastern philosophy and healing arts. I felt myself becoming someone new in those stolen hours with Jan, someone who could laugh freely, who could express opinions without calculating their safety, who could touch and be touched without the transaction of payment or power. For the first time since childhood, I experienced what it meant to be wanted simply for who I was. I love watching you discover things, Jan told me one afternoon as we stood before a painting in a small gallery. The way your face lights up when you see something beautiful, it's like watching someone remember they have a soul. Those words cut deeper than he could have known. Because that's exactly what it felt like, remembering I had a soul, rediscovering the parts of myself that years of training and trauma had taught me to bury. But even in my happiness, I could feel the shadows closing in. Anton's men were always watching, and I knew this interlude of joy was borrowed time. Love, I was learning, was the most dangerous poison of all, because it made you believe in possibilities that men like Anton would never allow. Still, for those precious months, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life beyond the cage that had been constructed around me. Jan made me remember what it felt like to hope. Reiner stopped walking.
Why do they call you Zizi? I thought your name was Yushi.
I laughed. He was so innocent. She and the Hungarian Z sound the same. So, we Chinese have this way among friends. Either they call you Xiao and your name, or double your name. In my case it would be Cici, but he couldn't pronounce that, so it became Zizi. Reiner nodded. Thank you. Anton let me grow for 2 years until he finally appeared. He came to me and said frankly, "You will never get away from me. Behave yourself or join the game." I knew what he was referring to. He had started to gain power and wealth that he used to fund the Black Robes. Also, that was the beginning of the Empire of the Thousand Suns. I didn't want to get involved. But the indications were clear: either help your elder brother or suffer punishments. Reiner looked at me. Brother? That was how we addressed each other within the group. What did you do? I disobeyed and got punished. Anton said, "If you lose your love, you are alone." A few months later, I realized he was right. The change began so subtly that at first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Jan's visits to the spa became less frequent, from twice a week to once, then to every other week. When he did come, our conversations felt strained, as if we were actors who had forgotten our lines. "You seem distracted," I observed one afternoon as I worked on his shoulders. The tension there had returned, worse than before. "Just work," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes in the mirror. "There's been some political upheaval in Vienna. My editor wants more coverage of the situation there." It made sense. I told myself it made perfect sense. But something in my chest tightened with each passing day that I didn't see him. When we did manage to meet for our clandestine dinners, Jan seemed to be looking over my shoulder rather than at me. Our conversations, once flowing like water, now felt forced and artificial. He would ask about my day with the same polite interest he might show a distant acquaintance. "Is everything all right between us?" I finally asked one evening as we sat in our usual cafe. The question had been burning in my throat for weeks. Jan looked startled, as if I'd woken him from a dream. "Of course. Why would you ask that? You seem distant. Like your mind is somewhere else. I told you, work has been demanding." But his voice lacked the warmth it once held when he spoke to me. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I pushed down the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted, telling myself that all relationships went through difficult periods. But then came the evening when Jan failed to appear for our planned dinner. I waited for 2 hours at the cafe, watching the door, making excuses for him in my mind. Perhaps he was ill. Perhaps there had been some urgent assignment. Perhaps he'd simply forgotten, though the Jan I knew would never forget something so important to both of us. The next week, he did the same thing. No message, no explanation, just my empty chair across from an empty table while other couples laughed and talked around me. When I finally saw him again at the spa 3 weeks later, he was different, not just distant, but almost cold. His greeting was formal, professional. He avoided prolonged eye contact and discouraged conversation. "Jan," I said quietly as I prepared his treatment. "Did I do something wrong?" "Wrong? No, of course not." But his voice was flat, emotionless. "I've just been thinking that perhaps we should keep things more professional between us." The words hit me like a physical blow. Professional? Yes. It's better that way, don't you think? Less complicated. I stood frozen behind him, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the massage oil. Less complicated. As if what we'd shared, those months of genuine connection, of love freely given and received, was merely a complication to be resolved. "I see," I managed to say, though I didn't see at all. The rest of that session passed in painful silence. Jan paid and left without scheduling another appointment. I told myself he would come back. That this was temporary, perhaps related to whatever pressures he was facing at work. But days turned to weeks, and weeks stretched into a month with no word from him. It was during this time that I began to notice things I had previously overlooked. The way conversations stopped when I entered certain establishments. The subtle glances between staff members at the spa. The feeling of being watched more intently than usual. One afternoon, while walking through the market district, I caught sight of Jan across the square. My heart leaped, finally, a chance to speak with him, to understand what had happened between us. But as I approached, I realized he wasn't alone. She was beautiful in the way that wealthy European women were beautiful, perfectly dressed, confident in her place in the world, hanging on Jan's arm like she belonged there. They were laughing together, and the sound of Jan's laughter, so familiar, so treasured, felt like a knife turning in my chest. I watched from the shadows as they strolled through the market, Jan's attention completely focused on her. He looked at her the way he used to look at me, spoke to her with the animated enthusiasm that had once been reserved for our conversations about literature and art. When he leaned down to kiss her cheek, I understood. This wasn't about work stress or political upheaval. This was about choice. Jan had made his choice, and it wasn't me. I followed them at a distance, hating myself for the impulse but unable to stop. They went to restaurants I could never afford, moved through social circles I could never join. She was introduced to his friends, the same friends who had met me as Zizi, the fascinating man with insights into Eastern philosophy. Now I was nowhere to be seen, replaced by someone who could stand beside him in daylight without complication. The final blow came when I overheard a conversation between two of the spa's clients. They were discussing Jan. Apparently, he was now engaged to the daughter of some minor Austrian noble. It was being celebrated as a brilliant match, good for his career prospects and social standing. "Of course," one of the women said. "Everyone knew about his little dalliance with that Chinese boy. But really, that was never going to last. Men like Jan need proper wives for proper futures. Little dalliance. That's what our love had been to the outside world, a temporary amusement before he settled down to serious life with a suitable partner." I left work early that day and returned to my studio, where Jan's books still sat on my shelf like accusers. I pulled them down one by one, remembering the hope in his voice when he'd given them to me. "I thought you might enjoy these." Had that been real, or had I imagined the affection in his gesture? Looking back, I could see the signs I'd chosen to ignore. The way he'd always chosen secluded places for our meetings. How he'd never invited me to his apartment, or introduced me to his family. The careful way he'd spoken about his future, never including me in those imagined tomorrows. I had been a secret from the beginning, and secrets, I knew better than most, were meant to be disposed of when they became inconvenient. That night, I'd burn his books in my small fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken as the flames consumed the words that had once brought us together. The smoke stung my eyes, but I didn't cry. The temple had taught me that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. When the last book had turned to ash, I sat in my dark room and finally understood what Anton had meant when he'd said, "If you lose your love, you are alone." I was alone. And now I was at Anton's mercy. I was at Anton's mercy, and he wasn't merciful. He dragged me to hell, a beautiful cage where his kindness hurt the most. If he had been beating me or abusing me, it wouldn't have been as bad as the way he played with me, punishing me with his kindness. Chapter 3: The Damned Wilted Flower. Selling out to Anton's estate was being brought into a designer birdcage. Gorgeous, sure, but still a birdcage. He had everything: collector's books, gardens from some period drama British series, an emporium of silver spoons. All mine, so he said. Or so he said anyway, but let's not get too big for our britches. He was more warden than welcome committee, always the fake grinning, little brother, routine. He didn't hurt me. Didn't need to. The real torture was all in my head. Anton was a master at keeping me off guard. One day he's affable, nigh indulgent, talking philosophy or whatnot, and the next cold as ice. Like, did I do something wrong? Ask him and he'd play the wounded party, toss in a little warning of sending me back to my filthy, old life. Classic psychological games. I started to hunger for any crumb of approval. Pathetic, no? But life's like that. Jen just dumped me. Anton was teaching me how to beg. He'd buy me anything, and then turn around and treat me like trash for not properly expressing gratitude. I couldn't get a break. One day I'm a genius, the next day I'm an idiot child. Weak, he claimed. Needed to be protected. From the world, by all appearances, but the real danger was him. The final straw? He praises my unusual Eastern point of view, then informs me that I'm too unsophisticated for European politics. The hypocrisy was so close to bringing a laugh out of me. Here's the man leading me around emotionally, warning me about being manipulated. That's when it struck me. I wasn't only trapped in his house, I was trapped in his games. He wanted me to believe love was sacrifice, that I'd be safe if I'd just let him take me. The scariest thing? I almost did. The lock was not on the door. It was in my head.